Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Thrive After Sports podcast. Folks, I have a very special guest here with me today. I've been following this woman's work from a distance for quite some time, at least 2 or 3 years at this point. I finally decided to reach out so I could have her on the podcast, and graciously, she's here with us today to share her story, talk about all the amazing work she's doing in the world. Folks, I'm here with Kayla Bradham. She is the Executive Vice President of the Sports Philanthropy Network. Kayla, first of all, thank you for being here today. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great. And thank you so much for having me on your show. I've been following you from a distance and really appreciate the work you're doing to transition athletes out of sports and into the quote unquote real world. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. Yeah. So you wear many hats. That was one of the things we talked about the first time we connected. I thought I was doing a lot and playing a bunch of different positions, but you have served in many different capacities over the years. So can you just tell us a little bit of your background leading up to what you're doing now? I know we got a lot of ground to cover, but I'm all ears.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'm going to take it way back to Kayla, the little girl, right? So I grew up in a home, single parent home in poverty. Frankly, we were so poor that we didn't have a car. Sometimes we didn't have a TV. Sometimes we didn't have a phone. But I'll tell you what, when the teacher handed out the permission slips for band and for softball, my eyes lit up. I wanted to be like this amazing alto saxophone player. And, frankly, I didn't want to play softball. I wanted to play baseball. Softball was the only thing they had for girls when I was growing up. But I came home and I gave the permission slips to my mom. And it never occurred to me that she'd say no. But my mom looked at me and she's like, money doesn't grow on trees. And I knew that was it. The conversation was over. There was no doubt. There was no begging, crying, having a temper tantrum or anything else. The conversation was done. So when I went back to school the next day, I gave those 2 blank permission slips back to my teacher, and a tear rolled down my face. And she looked at me and she said, Kayla, what's wrong? I just looked at her and it occurred to me for the first time in my life, hopelessness. And I said, money doesn't grow on trees. And I just broke down. I started crying. And that's the first time in my life that I can ever remember what hopelessness felt like. Like there was nothing that I could do to fix or create or anything else, the opportunity to play softball or to play the saxophone. And I don't know who. Somebody paid my registration fees for me that summer. I ended up playing third base and left field for the Reds. Here's the thing. I wasn't good. I mean, I wasn't average, right? But I learned what it was like to be on a sports team. I learned how to be coachable. I learned how to play a position. I learned how to stay in your lane. Learn how to practice, to dedicate myself, to focus. I used to throw the softball up against the garage and it would roll back to me on the grass a little bit. And then I'd have to go pick it up and do it again. But that's how I learned to throw a ball, because I didn't have anybody in my life taking me outside and say, let's play catch. I didn't have anybody teaching me how to swing the bat as a lefty. These were things that I just sort of had to watch or do by myself, or go to the coach and say, can you teach me? Like, how do I know when to swing? Hey, batter. And so I learned so many things that summer. And I remember an afternoon game. I'm at third base and I told you I wasn't very good, right? So my mind is kind of wandering and I'm just there in the sun thinking about how blessed I was to be there, right? And again, these are like little kid thoughts, right? Like first time I remember in my life having that feeling of I'm blessed. And I sat there and said, you know what? When I grow up, I want to do this. I want to create a chance for other kids who don't have money to be able to have the feeling I have right now, standing in the sun with a glove on my hand, waiting for the ball to come my way so I can throw it to first. I'll never forget that feeling. And fast forward a gazillion years, because I'm old, fast forward a gazillion years, I'm at a Tony Robbins conference at the United Center in Chicago with 12,000 other people. And call it what you want, call it destiny, call it fate, call it ordained opportunity. I met out of 12,000 people, the person who says, hey, you know what I want to do? I want to create a sports philanthropy network, something that like helps kids who don't have access to equipment get the equipment that they need, something, like health and safety and DEI initiatives. And my mouth drops. And I realized that was a divine appointment out of 12,000 people. My partner, Roy, and I started Sports Philanthropy Network going on 3.5 years ago, abundantly blessed, giving back and creating hope and possibility to the people who need it most. That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's such a cool story. Thank you for sharing that. And it's cool how, I mean, like you said, it's just a divine situation where you connected and you two were on the same page. Like literally, did he actually say the words, I want to start a sports philanthropy network? Is that what he said?
Yep. So
that's crazy.
Roy, actually, he had taught sports management in the master's program at Northwestern University. He had practiced law. He was an NFL agent at one point, and he knew he didn't want to do the legal side. He wanted to do the nonprofit side. And so he comes out of that world. I come out of this sales management, team leading, leadership type of world. And you put those two skills together, it's ordained. It's really, really, really fun. I tell people all the time, I have the best job in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because even on your LinkedIn, it says connecting sport to goodness. Like that's how you define what your role or, what your new mission in life is. And I think that pretty much sums up everything that you're doing. Just a quick side note before I forget to ask you, did you ever find out who the person was who paid for your registration when you were a kid?
Honestly, I didn't. And I'm so thankful that I didn't, because it reminds me, do your good in private. I mean, if you donate a few $1 million and you want your name on a building, that's fine. But for most of us, if you're going to go drop groceries off on some mom's porch, ring the doorbell and run. So I'm just thankful. I have nobody to thank except for everybody who's ever done something good and didn't seek any glory for it.
I love that. One of the things that stood out to me the most about that story is, you hear people doing random acts of kindness, anonymously, like paying for the next or the person behind them in line in a drive-through, or, the next person in line at a coffee shop or at a restaurant or whatever the case may be. But the thing about your story, the fact that someone paid for your registration, of course, it was great that you got to play softball, but there's no way that person could have known that that was going to change the trajectory of your entire life. Like literally that one random act of kindness led to you starting Sports Philanthropy Network and being able to impact others. And I think what I want listeners to take away from that, because, people have heard me talk time and time again on this show, Kayla, just about when you're done playing your sport, finding ways to serve and give to others. But that is such a powerful example of what can actually happen. And you may even never know about it. But when you put those things out there, beautiful things happen. So such a cool part of your story. I really love that piece.
Thank you. It's all about planting a garden and just watching it grow, right? Every so often you have to pull out the weeds, but water that garden and just watch it grow.
That's right. So I want to dive into Sports Philanthropy Network a little bit more. You've already given us the overview. Can you just give us a deeper dive into not only what it is that you all do, but just maybe even some of the initiatives that you're working on right now, or some initiatives that you have coming up?
Sure. So thank you all. Before I even start, thank you for that opportunity, because it is really dear to my heart. So our tagline is, we build stronger, healthier, and more inclusive communities through sport. Really, everybody has a tagline that sounds great, but I'm always like, well, okay, that sounds good. What are you really focused on? And we're focused on athlete health and safety, things like concussions, heart screenings, you name it, right? Like, let's keep our athletes safe. We're focused on access. That's me, right? The kid who couldn't afford registration fees. making sports possible. And then we're also focused on DEI initiatives. And all of those 3 initiatives play very important roles to our athletes, to our coaches. We work primarily with professional athletes, the teams, the leagues, the governing bodies, colleges and universities on their sports nonprofits, their charities, their foundations. We also serve as a resource for sports nonprofits throughout the world. So it's not the give a man a fish. It's teach a person how to fish. So we do executive director masterminds, fundraising masterminds. We do webinars. We go in and we actually teach how to run your nonprofit effectively and efficiently. One of the initiatives that we're working on that I'm most proud of, we're involved with the Sports Bra Project. We're doing, as we travel, we're blessed, we travel all over. We're getting these little networking groups together and we're collecting sports bras for underprivileged women and girls, and we're keeping them in that community. And it sounds silly, right? But we would never send a boy into football without genital protection, if I can say that on the podcast, right? But I was just at the women's championship basketball games in Minneapolis. And here's a little fun fact. I live in Milwaukee. Minneapolis isn't that far from my house. Go there frequently. I did not know that Minneapolis had the largest Somali population outside of the country of Somalia. So Minneapolis welcomed a lot of refugees into their community. Most of us know that Somali women and girls are very modest. Most of them wear head coverings. Did it ever occur to any of us that in a culture where modesty is so important, it would be really nice that a young girl or a young woman had a sports bra instead of wearing something that was donated to her that was an office bra or something like that? And if you're a refugee in another country, it's quite possible that you don't have a plethora of money for discretionary things like sports bras or sports fees or sports equipment or anything else. So if we can just go into a community and provide the things that are needed, whether it's cleats, whether it's used equipment, whether it's sports bras, whether it's registration fees, concussion, baseline testing, or heart screenings, or you name it, isn't that really where hope and possibility come in? It's like looking at what's getting in the way and removing the barriers. It's not brain science. It's not brain science. It's like, okay. And here's the thing, it's different in every community. The population of Austin, Texas has completely different problems than the Somali refugees in Minneapolis or the community I live in, Milwaukee. If you live in Milwaukee, there's areas of Milwaukee where you can't go outside and play. You're not going to find fitness centers in the inner city of Milwaukee. And you probably don't want to take public transportation to go on the outskirts of Milwaukee just because you don't want your kids on the bus alone. And I'm a single mom to 8 kids. I can say that. I can say that. So we just look at what's going on in different communities throughout the United States, frankly, throughout the world. Look at the challenges and remove the barriers. It's great. It's a great job. We solve problems. We put puzzle pieces together. We introduce the right people to the right people. And we help nonprofits get better and better each day.
That's amazing, Kayla. Yeah,
Thank
you do. Yeah, you do. There's so much there that I want to unpack. Like there's so many, I got a page full of notes over here, just in terms of all the different areas that you covered. And I wanted to take a deep dive into some of those areas. But while you were sharing, something that popped into my mind was, you know what, it would be great if you could give some advice to people. And let me tell you why, because a lot of people in the world, they'll say, oh, I want to make a difference for this community or this group of people, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. But they limit themselves, right? They'll say, oh, I don't have the money to do that, or who am I to do that, right? So it may be like a self-doubt, or, you know, how you view yourself type of thing. What advice can you give to someone Like, because it sounds like you just hit the ground running. You got started, you found good partners you can team up with to make it happen. But to that person out there who wants to make a difference but doesn't know how to get started, can you just give them some general advice?
Sure. So everybody has heard the old cliche, time, talent, or treasure. Not everybody has a lot of money. When I was a kid growing up, no money, very little talent. The treasure was the desire of my heart to create impact, right? So I had this drive. My advice, frankly, when you're cleaning out your garage this spring and you see your kids' old baseball bats and that old frisbee that's, used like beyond use, but there's still life left in it. When you're cleaning out your garage and you see, the kids' cleats that are too small and they outgrew, or that hula hoop that's hanging on a wall and nobody ever uses it, don't bring that to Goodwill and make somebody who hardly has enough money pay $6. Bring it to whatever you're passionate about. If it's the Boys and Girls Club, bring it there. If it's a women's shelter or a men's shelter or kids on the street, you know what you're passionate about. Give what you can. And if you're abundantly blessed and you can buy, a bunch of basketballs, or I love the idea of jump ropes. They're cheap, they're small, they fit in your pocket. If you can walk around with a couple of jump ropes in your pocket or your purse, and you see, a kid walking down the street by themselves or whatever, go ahead and roll down your window and throw out a jump rope at them. Just keep driving. Just keep driving.
Drive by,
the jump rope drive by. But we have so much ability to make a difference, right? If you have tickets to a sporting event because you have been blessed and something comes up and it's raining and you don't want to go sit at a baseball game in the rain, don't just leave the tickets sitting in your phone. Make a phone call. Give them to somebody instead of wasting them. I see that all the time, wasted tickets. Drives me crazy. It's a pet peeve. There are kids who live within 3 miles of stadiums who've never once had the opportunity to go to a game. Google your favorite charity and say, hey, I got a couple of tickets. We're not going to use them. Is there anybody in your organization that'd be blessed by them? Just do that. That's easy.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. That's great advice right there. Just kind of what I heard and what you shared was not making excuses or finding ways for what you can't do, but looking for opportunities for what you can do. And I think that's an important message, not just with what we're talking about here today, but really anything in life, just staying focused on what you are able to do. And oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But you just made me think of something, because you're all about, athletes transitioning out of sports, right? And I work with so many professional or semi-professional athletes who tell me they felt lost when their sports career ended. But you know what? These athletes have so much experience. They know how to run a 5K. They know how to make a free throw. They know how to, do some great tackle. So the other thing is, if you've played a sport, I don't care if you played Pop Warner football, truck your butt down to your local community practice field and say, hey, I don't know if you need to run a background check on me or what, but I just want to let you know, I'd be happy to volunteer here a couple of days a month, a couple Saturdays, or you need a hitting coach or whatever. I did this. You have some kids in the neighborhood and you want to do a couch to 5K with them. You know how to do that. Be prepared to have a background check run on you. Don't just walk in and be creepy. But these aren't crazy things. It's using your time and your talent to change somebody's life. And if you have treasure, all the more power to you. Wish more people had treasure and were willing to give it away. I'll tell you what, I was at the NFL owners meetings a couple of weeks ago at the Breakers in Florida. Our interns did some quick math looking at what's on the internet. And of course, you only know what's on the internet, right? But billions of dollars with the NFL owners, and some of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Kind, generous. Some of these owners are doing so much for their communities, until you start thinking like, well, how do they stack up against each other? You got all these owners, which teams give more? How do they give? If we had a little scoreboard, where would we rank them? Just like teams, right? Where do we rank them? I'd love to do that with some of the owners of professional and semi-professional teams, but give as you're able and as you feel led. Just be creative and be willing to step up.
Great advice. That's a good idea you had about the scoreboard, because people are competitive. That would be like, I'm gonna give more than this team, or I'm gonna be the one who's at the top of the list for giving. That may be a great idea. I think you got something there, Kayla. That's a solid plan right there.
That's my partner Roy's plan. I got to give him credit. He talks about that all the time, and it's something that we're really focusing on for the second half of 22 and the first half of 23, is really creating a little bit of competition. We live in a world where either everybody wants to be first or everybody wants to be first to go second and give and say, after you, right? There's two types of people. But for those people who want to be first, well, let's give them an opportunity to be first in giving and philanthropy.
Right. Yeah, man. This is just a side note. You have me thinking about how this can be applied at the university level as well. Because I have a lot of course, I have my own coaching business and the books, the podcast, but I'm partnered with several for-profit and nonprofit businesses, and we rely on university and donor support. And so having some sort of, rankings about who's giving the most to support their athletes in transition. This is good. All right, I'm going to write that down so I can make sure I actually explore that idea further. That's huge. I love that.
I love it. And, here's the thing. When you talk about colleges and universities, especially as it pertains to athletes, generally the college athletes that I speak with, they're only focused on one thing, and that's making it to the pros. But when I talk to the coaches, all of the coaches tell me they want whole and complete athletes. Any sponsors I talk to who are looking at NIL deals, they don't want just an athlete. They want a person, right? Because people buy from people. So I have this idea that, you talk about hula hoops, jump ropes, whatever it is. Let's say you can get a jump rope in bulk for $1. Well, what would happen if all the athletes on a football team, a basketball team, the cheerleaders, the gymnasts, whatever it is, the water polo team, wonder if they started competing against each other and bought jump ropes. And then they spent a day in their communities, taking photos with kids, signing autographs, and handing out jump ropes. You don't think that that's how you get picked up for an NIL sponsorship? You don't think that that's what a coach wants when they're selecting their next pro athlete at the draft? They want whole and complete people. And I'll tell you what, I guarantee that opportunity would change that college athlete's life.
Right. And the kids' lives too, whoever they're impacting. And the kids'
lives too. And isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah.
From a $1 jump rope, it's that easy.
Yeah, so good, Kayla. This actually leads me to something else I wanted to talk to you about, because I remember you told me a story the first time we connected. I believe it was a hockey player who became an author. And I know you're connected with, that's just one of a million stories. I'm sure you can tell with the circles that you run in and the people you're connected with, both current and former athletes who are doing great things out in the world with their businesses, their nonprofits, or just with their time, like you said. Is there anyone that comes to mind? You could tell that story if that's okay about the hockey player, or if there's anyone else that comes to mind with maybe some of the things that stand out in your mind as like people who are, and I know it may be hard to choose, but people who are like really, really having an impact in a major way. Does anyone come to mind?
Yeah, sure. Gazillions of men and women come to mind, because there's no shortage of athletes who are doing good, and they don't get the credit they deserve. If an athlete gets, charged with marijuana, they're going to be all over Twitter and the news for 3 days straight. That's all people are going to talk about. But an athlete does something like, outfit an entire sports team with a baseball diamond, equipment, cleats, you name it, it probably won't even make the news. But I'll go ahead and I'll share that story about the hockey player, because it's one of a gazillion other stories that I could speak about for hours and talk about for days. But that particular hockey player is one of my favorite stories because his story resonates with me. And I'll tell you why at the end of the story, not at the beginning, because I don't want to ruin it. The hockey player that you're referencing is Theo Fleury. Theo Fleury played in the NHL. He won a Stanley Cup. And growing up, I loved Theo Fleury, but I hated him at the same time because he was always drunk. He was always getting kicked off the ice. He was just a troublemaker, but he was so good. Like, he was the guy that you hated to love and loved to hate. But, and I remember just thinking, like, Theo, get it together. Because I felt entitled to having athletes that I could look up to. I felt that they needed to meet my moral expectations. And I didn't want to love a guy who was always drinking and getting kicked off the ice because I didn't want that. Well, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to sit down with Theo and have a conversation. And he told me his story. And I'll paraphrase it. If you ever want to go back and you want to watch that podcast episode or listen to it, it's Theo Fleury on Legacy After the Locker Room. And he tells his story much better than I possibly could. But growing up in Canada, there were a bunch of kids in his neighborhood who were good. The way it worked is when you're in high school in Canada, you go live with your scout. You kind of have practice in the morning, some school, more practice, and that's how you get picked up by the NHL. Well, when the NHL kicked him out of the league, his agent said, Theo, you're going to need money to support yourself now. I suggest that you write a book. And so he said, okay, if I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write a good book, a real book, a book that creates impact. So the book that Theo Fleury wrote was his story. And a big part of his story was that while he was in high school, living with his scout, going to practice in the morning and the afternoon and trying to make it into the big leagues, he was raped by a scout 150 times-ish over 4 years. And the reason he drank so much was from trauma because he never dealt with that. And I don't know how many people are watching this, but I do know the numbers about abuse. And whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, those numbers are huge. And for all of us who've ever experienced abuse, we know the shame. We know the fear of talking about it. We know that many of us turn to other things to deal with the trauma. Theo's a real example of what so many of us have dealt with as survivors of trauma. And I'm so proud of Theo because what he did after he wrote that book is he got in contact with a young woman who had an amazing story of trauma survivorship. And he started a nonprofit so that anybody suffering from trauma could get counseling for free. And whether that trauma was through sexual abuse or whether it's PTSD from being in the military or a young child watching their parents killed in a car crash, he's creating hope and possibility by providing services to people to get help. I'm just going to tell you, I think the work that he's doing now is so much more important than winning a Stanley Cup. I now am so proud to say I love Theo Fleury. He's one of the most amazing men I know. And he's one of literally thousands of other athletes who are doing great things that you would never know.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kayla. It really is such a powerful example of, this what this whole show and everything I'm doing is about. Like, how do you thrive? How do you make an impact? How do you have a fulfilling life after your sport? And that's why I appreciate you going into that story, because it really is a testament, what Theo's doing by sharing himself first and foremost and opening up about that is going to help countless other people that he'll never even speak to are impacted by his work. And that's really a beautiful thing.
What's really cool about that So when he went to do his first book signing after that book was released, um, think about Barnes and Noble, okay, like in the United States. So whatever that equivalent is in Canada, he didn't think a lot of people were interested in his book. He was still kind of ashamed, he was kicked out of the NHL. What actually happened is people were lined up to the door of that bookstore. Not only that, they were around the block. And as he signed autographs, he heard over and over, same here, me too, same here, me too, over and over and over. And why I think that's so important is because, especially unfortunately with men and transgender or LGBTQ plus groups, there's more shame, it seems like, in being able to openly talk about physical, sexual, emotional, whatever abuse it is. And everybody deserves that opportunity to heal. So I think it's even more beautiful that he found a way to relate to so many victims besides just straight females. That's huge. That's so huge.
Yeah. Wow. Man, you know what? I bet it was healing for him too. Not only, of course, to have that moment where people are coming up to you saying "me too," but even the process of telling his story in the form of writing that book. I'm sure it was very healing for him to be able to get that out, so it didn't exist just within him like it did for so long. To be able to get it out there, and it's just really cool what happens when you start to share your story and watch it impact other people. Of course, I've seen it in my personal life. I don't want to say not nearly the same as Theo. Obviously, everyone has a different mission that they're on here in this lifetime. And I know you've seen it too in your work. If you're sharing yourself, other people gravitate towards that because it's real and it's true. And people see themselves in you based on what they've been through. And it's just such a great way to be able to help people. So thank you. Thank you for sharing about Theo.
You're welcome. And I think that, that word for that is catharsis. And it's, like the message I have for college athletes, high school athletes who didn't get picked up by D1 schools, maybe not even D2 or D3 schools. Maybe high school is the last sport they're ever going to play, and they're living vicariously through their kids. But when I talk to semi-pro and professional athletes, a lot of them feel so lost when they transition out of sports. Their whole identity is wrapped up in being an athlete. And that's where I really see alcohol abuse, drug abuse, risky behavior, things like that. And if we give athletes at every level the opportunity to share their testimony of sport, what they're proud of, what they did or didn't do well, their takeaways, their advice, give them an opportunity to mentor a younger athlete, being able to share that story and bring hope and address the, I did this, don't do that. I did this, man, don't, whatever you do, don't do that. Giving athletes that opportunity to give back, I think, is the catharsis, the healing to making that transition out. And again, it's things that are so easy, right? But when is the last time we asked a college freshman to go back and talk to the senior class at the high school that he graduated from a year ago? And talk to the JV kids or the varsity kids. When's the last time we asked a professional athlete to go back to the school that they graduated? And this becomes even more important with HBCUs. And speak hope and possibility to the college athletes playing at their alma mater. Why don't we do these things?
Yeah.
Because nobody asks.
Yeah. I think it's, like you said, it's definitely something that, like, that's what I was lacking. You mentioned the drinking and all that. That was me, because I felt like my experience, I thought it was just a Taj thing. And so because I didn't understand at the time that other athletes, pretty much all athletes in some way, shape, or form go through this when they leave their sport, for me, I thought something was wrong with me. And so I existed in like a vacuum and I was isolated and there was a lot of drinking. And to your point, Kayla, which is why I'm glad you brought this up, once I got through the other side of that, that's why I was inspired to start doing this work. Because if it's like, if I can be the light at the end of the tunnel or go back and basically help people who are, in some way, the younger version of myself, then that's what's needed. And it's great to see that it's in the conversation nowadays. Like you've seen it, you've been in this game a long time. You've been in the world of athletics a long time. Even in the past 2-3 years, there's been a significant improvement, not just in talking about athlete mental health, but the transition. And like you said, people going back to speak at universities, going back to speak at high schools. And I think there's a shift happening where we're starting to see things moving in the right direction in terms of athletes supporting the athletes coming up behind them.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because we tend to be athlete centric and we're focused on the athlete. Well, that athlete is somebody's son, somebody's brother or sister, somebody's partner. So if we really love the athletes, we want them to have strong relationships, right? I don't want somebody's relationship ending because the athlete is drinking too much, or they're suicidal, or they need counseling, but nobody has pointed them in the right direction. They think that nobody understands, right? So if we truly care about athletes and sport, then we need to address the mental issues. But beyond that, I think we need to start being, and we are getting better. I agree with you. But how many concussions has this athlete had, right? Because it's not just football players who get concussions. So when we look at the impact of traumatic brain injury, when we look at athletes who, quite frankly, are addicted to an adrenaline rush, right? Because that's really, at the end of the day, what athletes are adrenaline junkies, right? That's what gets us to win games. Well, what happens when they're not getting that adrenaline rush anymore? What happens to their chemical levels in their brain? Why are they isolating themselves? Why are they more violent? Yada, 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 yada. That list goes on and on and on. There's plenty of studies. People can read about it. But if we say that we care, then why isn't there support right from the get-go to transition athletes out? And I want to say thank you, Taj. What you're doing, the Thrive After Sports, the creating the hope and the possibility for life after sport, it's vital because you get it. And you are vulnerable enough to say, yeah, I struggled a bit with drinking because I didn't know how to cope when I didn't get that adrenaline rush. I didn't know who I was aside from being an athlete. And I think that's the difference, is your catharsis came from being vulnerable and finding a way to create an impact. And those are the two things. I really believe those are the two things.
Well, thank you, Kayla. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. I received that. Obviously, it means a lot coming from someone like yourself who's seen a lot of people who do great work. So just to be acknowledged by you, it means a lot to me. I appreciate that. I want to be respectful of your time. There's a few more things I wanted to get to. Now, you mentioned that part of what Sports Philanthropy Network does is you basically have mentorship or education for founders, right? Especially in the nonprofit space. So there are a lot of people listening who, people who tune into this podcast, of course, current athletes, former athletes, parents of athletes, coaches, people in athletic departments. But I personally am connected with a lot of former athletes, as you might imagine, who have nonprofits. What does it look like to actually get that education? Or say someone's listening like, hey, I have a nonprofit. I'm thinking of like 10 people in my head right now who are doing great work. If they wanted to get connected with your resources or get some education, how should they go about doing that? Or even just off the top of your head, is there anything you could share with them in terms of what it looks like to run a successful nonprofit?
Sure. Really great question. You might not like my answer, but I work with so many athletes who they're passionate and they care about a cause, whether it's cancer, financial literacy, feeding, hungry kids, homelessness, whatever it is. And their agent says, "Great, I'll get a foundation put together for you." And the agent comes back with a binder and they say, "Oh, congratulations, you have a 501c3, you're a nonprofit." And they hand them a binder. Well, that's great that there's a legal entity, but there was nobody to show them how to run that nonprofit, right? So that's problem number one. The flip side of that, Taj, is the athletes who tell me, and they're very proud, and they say, "Yeah, I have a nonprofit." And I say, "Oh, that's awesome. So what do you do?" And they say, "Oh, it's so cool. I do a golf. Last year we did a golf event. We did a dinner gala. I did a sports camp for kids, and I volunteered my time and I signed autographs over at the local sporting goods store." I say, "Oh, that's great. What do you do?" And they look at me like, "I just told you." I'm like, "Oh, my bad." Right? Like that's on me. Say, "So can I just ask you a question? It sounds like you're doing a lot of great work. How much money did you make doing that? How much money did you raise for your charity?" And they're like, "Really proud to say we raised $13,000 for good." And that sounds really good, right? Shake your head. Yeah, it sounds great. Until I say something like, "Okay, so to rent out the golf course, cater the dinner, do your dinner gala, do the sport camp, how much money did you put into all of that?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, I mean, I don't really keep the books or anything, but I think it was something like just shy of 20." I'm
Right.
like, "Okay, all right. So listen, you're not alone." That's what a lot of people tell me. It sounds like you're about $7,000 in the hole, and a whole bunch of people rolled up their sleeves and worked for free to make this work, which they probably felt good about, but really, at the end of the day, you're about $7,000 in the hole. So would it be unfair of me to suggest that maybe moving forward, you could save yourself a lot of time, a lot of hassle, a lot of frustration, and just actually give $7,000 to your charity of choice that you support and not have to deal with all of the frustration, the headache, whatever, of trying to run this and deal with the taxes and, all of the compliance work. And it's like the light bulb goes off. So quite frankly, there's a lot of people with nonprofits where if they're honest with themselves, they probably would be better suited to support an established nonprofit than try to run one themselves. And sometimes I'll hear, "Yeah, you know what, I think you're right. Can you help me?" And I say, "You know what would be really awesome? You're passionate about girls in sport. So why don't you become the face of X, Y, or Z nonprofit? And when they have their charity golf events, when they have their dinner galas, you're the celebrity guest, you're the keynote speaker, you're shaking hands and kissing babies and signing autographs and all the things that you love, but everybody wins." And the light bulb goes off. Other times, "Taj, I hear, but Kayla, you don't understand. My mom had cancer. My grandma had cancer. You don't understand. I'm doing this for my mom. I'm doing this for my grandma." And when I hear that, my heart melts. I don't think with my head, I think with my heart then. And I say, "So you know what it sounds like to me? You just need to get equipped with that skill set to be really good at honoring your mom and your grandma. So let's get you in a mastermind. Let's get you some training and let's get you partnered up with a nonprofit in that cancer space who's doing a really good job so that you can sort of learn from them and you guys can work together, you can network. Because I support you and I love what you're doing for your mom, for your grandma. And I'm here to support you." See how that works, Taj?
Mm-hmm.
It's really, really beautiful when we lock elbows and we run together. The NFL last year, their motto, "In the end zones at the Pro Bowl, we run as one," right? Do we? Do we run as one? Let's run as one.
Wow. Okay. So, man, so many things about what you just shared. I love that you're having very real conversations with people. And actually, it's really like mentoring. The education sometimes isn't like, hey, this is how you run a nonprofit. It's like, that's what I love about what you share. It's like, this is where you're at. You would be better suited doing this. Because a lot of people think, especially like you said, especially if you're sitting on a bunch of money, a lot of people think nonprofits are just a place to park your funds. And like you said, just have a binder versus whether you're running a nonprofit or for profit, it's a business and it needs to operate as such. Um, there are a lot of people who like, I don't have a nonprofit, right? But I have an LLC and I'm a contractor, but I work very closely. I'm basically an independent contractor, but I work very closely with several nonprofits. And the nonprofit partners that I have, they operate in a capacity, like you said, where they're actually keeping the books, operating like a business, making sure they're profitable, making sure they're not losing money on events, but having events, keeping the cost low and raising money so they can actually put it towards things that are going to have an impact on who they're looking to serve. So, I mean, that's so great. Not everyone's meant to have a nonprofit. Like you said, sometimes it's better just to put some money. Are you connected with, this is a side note, but are you familiar with Miriam Glass at Athlete Soul? Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Athlete Soul.
Okay. She's like her Jonathan Orr at Athlete Transition Services, Marcus Alston at Athlete Haven. Those are like the main people that I have partnerships with because those are the people who are running their nonprofits like it's a business and staying on top of the books and actually raising significant funds and creating new programming. And, it's exciting for me to be involved in that world because they don't just have a binder, like you said, but
Well, and what you said, here's the thing. I'm going to use your words because you're spot on and people need to hear this. You say, it's all about keeping your spending low and the money you raise high, right? Do you know what oftentimes the largest budget item is for a fundraising event? It's the speaker fee for a professional athlete.
Right.
Right. And don't get me wrong, a workman is worth his wages, right? Like it's okay for an athlete to say, yeah, my speaking fee is $7,000, right? Like that's what the market is. That's what the market pays. Or maybe it's 12,000, maybe it's 2,000. And you've got somebody who was an athlete back in 2002. I don't know. But whatever it is, if you want to truly give and you're an athlete, offer to go to those fundraising events and support the causes that you care about. You don't have to say yes to everybody who asks. And it's okay to say, I have a speaker's fee. That's okay. You earn that. But if you really want to give, take the causes that you're passionate about and go volunteer at those events. Go volunteer at the celebrity golf event. Go be the keynote speaker at a dinner gala. Go be the celebrity athlete at the community league tournament championship game. Go volunteer at these things and say, here's the thing, my speaker fee is usually $4,000. For this event, for the 3-4 hours, it's usually $7,000. Get your free game of golf in, get your catered dinner, but give back. And that saves the nonprofit so much money that they can use for good. That's a great gift. That's a huge blessing.
Right. Yeah. Kayla, I know we have a hard stop at noon. We'll have to have you back on because I feel like we barely scratched the surface of all the different things we could talk about today. But before we close out, I just want to say, number one, thank you for your time. This has been phenomenal. Always enjoy having a conversation with you. And it's great that we got to record it this time because I know some of the topics we covered are going to help a lot of people. But as we start to wind down, can you please, number one, tell people a little bit about the Legacy After the Locker Room podcast and how people can check you out and go listen, but also where they can tap in with you on social media, where they can follow your journey, if anyone wants to connect, all that good stuff, please.
Taj, before I do that, I just want to say thank you for this really remarkable opportunity to give back to the sports community and create hope and possibility and build stronger, healthier, more inclusive communities through sports. I treasure that, and I see the work you're doing. I see you. I acknowledge you. I applaud you. I'm on your team. Okay. If people want to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram at Kayla Bradham. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Also Kayla Bradham. Check out the website, sportsphilanthropynetwork.org, sportsphilanthropynetwork.org. You can catch, just Google on YouTube, Legacy After the Locker Room. The podcast will come up. We're getting pretty close now to almost 100 different professional athletes, former professional athletes, talking about their charities and causes, sharing their stories. Nobody's on there to see me. They're on there to see those professional athletes. So go check it out. They're great. They're great stories. I'm here. I care. I care about the professional athletes, but I care just as much about, the kids playing Pop Warner and making sure that they're staying safe and having fun. So if you're passionate about sports, or you're passionate about athlete safety, DEI, access to sports, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, follow me on Instagram, and Tash, thank you for the work you're doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kayla. All right, everybody. This has been another great episode of Thrive After Sports with the one and only Kayla Bradham. Make sure you check the show notes and follow Kayla and everything she's up to. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks again, Kayla. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Tash.